We'll just get started. So you may have already met Jim in his session he did a week ago about remixing high school English, but if you weren't at that one, which I mean, some of you were in science, so you probably weren't, Jim is a high school teacher for English and World Studies.
You got it.
I'm always happy that I get that right. And he's going to be telling you all about some really interactive 3D cool engagement strategies. If you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat. Just make sure that you select all panelists and attendees. I think a lot of you are right now, we're just doing all panelists. Just make sure you hit that button and select the second one, because that means that everyone can see your question, just in case people are asking the same question or they aren't sure, they want to go off of you. It's really helpful. Or you can use the Q&A button. I'm not ignoring you if I don't answer your question right away. It's just that if it's not relevant to what he's talking about, I don't want to interrupt, and we'll just do them all at the end if they're not relevant exactly to a certain context. So without further ado, Jim.
Thanks. I should mention too that I'm going to assume most of you are probably on computers of some kind. If you happen to have your phone around you, that's probably a good thing. Not that we're going to do any work with it, but just so you can access an app or two that I'm going to show to you a little bit later on. So I want to thank you all for coming. And I also want to show you something. I'm going to show you this. This is a part of a mask I picked up when I taught in South Korea. I sadly broke the bottom of the mask. That's why it's missing. The reason why I want to show you this is this object from different angles, but your understanding of the object is still completely determined by what I let you see, right? So if I were to keep this object only like this, you're missing a significant chunk of it, right? And so think about that in terms of how we tend to consume images generally, whether they're in textbooks or even online. A flat image can be really powerful, but it's also limiting. It's one view, right? And even videos can be great, but you're still limited by whatever that camera lets you see, right? And so what I hope to show you today is why looking and incorporating 3D models into your classrooms is so powerful. So we good? You can see that? Rock and roll. Okay. So my goal today is to show you lots of different ways that you can use that 3D technology, existing technology in your classrooms, and to also show you how you can actually make your own. So the order in which we're going to go today is kind of an order of commitment. I originally had an order of difficulty, but that's not quite accurate. It's not like the fancy stuff I'm going to show you at the end about making models is necessarily difficult. It just takes some time to figure out. And a better understanding of the process than I would, and I still was able to pull it off. So what we're going to start with first is using existing 3D models on the internet. Then I'm going to show you how to embed those models into common platforms like Word and D2L. Super easy. We'll take a break from 3D models. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why 360 cameras are so powerful. Then we're getting some really fun stuff. I'll show you how you can actually make your own models. And I've worked with students to do this. We've made our own models. And then we're going to finish with a project I'm really excited about. With my history students, I've been building 3D museums using a game engine that you can download and you can explore. And even if you're not ready for that stage, you might want to think about what different sort of applications this might have in your own class. So again, I'm coming at this from a history perspective, but every time I show you something, I want you to think, okay, what would that look like in my subject area? So we're going to start with this. Right now, it's a still image, but it's actually a 3D model of Machu Picchu in Peru. And it was made by having a drone fly over Machu Picchu, take a whole bunch of pictures, and those images were all thrown into a program that I'll show you later. And this model was created, and it's interactive. So two places where you can find these models are a website called Sketchfab and Smithsonian 3D Digitization. Okay, so I'm going to leave that up for just for 1 sec, so you can go there on your own if you wish, but I'm going to take you there in a second as well. Sketchfab and Smithsonian 3D Digitization. So let me start with Sketchfab, and I'll show you, I think, hopefully, why this is so powerful as I wait patiently for the internet to catch up with my thoughts. There we go. Okay. So Sketchfab, the way to think about Sketchfab, think about YouTube for 3D objects in the sense that there's lots of stuff on YouTube. The vast majority of it does not belong in a classroom, but we all know there's tons of great stuff that does, right? So the same sort of thing applies here. So if I decide to search,
it's not showing the Sketchfab.
Well, that's not good.
It's showing the slide.
So let me go with new share and make sure I am actually on Sketchfab. Is that better?
Yep, that's perfect.
Awesome. Well, I'll keep that in mind for next time. So as I was saying, Sketchfab is a little bit like YouTube in the sense that there's lots of stuff that you would not want to use in the classroom, but there's tons of stuff that you might. So I'm going to start by just typing in something simple like museum, because as a history teacher, I'm particularly interested in that. And I'm actually going to go to users here inside of models. So I get results from major museums around the world. And so what's super cool is that museums from around the world have actually uploaded their content up to the internet for us to use in a variety of ways. And I should say too, there's lots of content from the other subject areas as well. Science, actually helped one of my colleagues download one of the models of T4 something or other, and we printed it off, and he now has an interactive model in his classroom. We have had, we've looked at models from Sketchfab in geography as well. There's lots of possibilities. So let me show you, let's pick one. Let's choose this one. I believe there might be audio attached to this one, but it's such, yep. So I'm going to control the audio there. The reason I chose this one is that's the Rosetta Stone, one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the history of humanity, because it was what allowed archaeologists to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs for the first time in thousands of years. But here's the thing, right now it's static, right? But it's actually an interactive model, which means you can spin it around, interact with it all sorts of different angles, right? And why this is so important in history, especially, is that when we look at things from the past, artifacts, we call them primary sources, and we want students to investigate them, right? And there's something inherently playful about this level of interaction where you get to interact with this model and spin it around. That doesn't happen when it's a flat image. And it's the Rosetta Stone is a great example of that. So the first time I tried this experiment with 3D models, an interesting thing happened. In the past, I had shown students an image of the Rosetta Stone, and we talked about the Rosetta Stone, and they understood its significance, that it had 3 separate languages written on it. And because archaeologists could read the first 2, they could reason out what the symbols in the third, the hieroglyphs, must mean. The first time I had students in my class look at this model on computers, I swear before I got back to the front of the class, there was a kid who put up his hand and said, "Hey, Mr. Pedrech, there's like 3 different languages on this thing," which is entirely the reason why we're looking at it, right? And because that student could interact with this model and spin it around, he made an observation that's essential to understanding this model, right? So let's take a look at the Smithsonian 3D digitization, and I'll show you what sort of stuff you can actually find there. So this is a little bit more science-based, right, than the model we were just looking at, or Sketchfab, but also incredible stuff. So here is a command module for Apollo 11 that you can spin around and interact with in various ways. But what's also super cool, and I hope I find the right model. Oh, sorry, that's a still image. I guess you have to go back out. There's actually an interactive version, and there it is. That's what I'm looking for, from inside the capsule, right? So what this means is that by using this model, or any models like it, students can interact with the space in a much different way than they would if they were looking at a flat image, right? So that's exciting and that's great, but there's something else that I think is really important that we need to talk about in the context of these models, and it is this: that while you can find these models online and you can use them in a variety of ways, what's super cool is you can actually embed them in common platforms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with D2L. So let me just go back here. And I go back to Sketchfab. And let's this time choose Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was incredibly important Egyptian pharaoh, a queen, a female pharaoh who essentially took control of Egypt at a key time. So down here, you can see that we have this option for embed. What embed allows us to do, it allows us to take any content that we find on the internet and place it in a site that's ours, right? So this may look complicated because you'll see some code, but it's actually really, really easy. So I'm going to click embed. This window is going to pop up, and see down here, all this code, I just click and it copies it. So why that is really exciting is if we go to an e-learning course, like say, well, it's going to be strange to put Hatshepsut in an English course, but let's do it anyway. So if I go to say announcements in my English course, I start a new announcement. I go right here, and it says right here, insert stuff. And there's all these different options here, but if you see right here, it actually says this option, insert embed code. I can just paste that in there, hit next. I'll have to allow it and insert. And when I publish, whoops, gotta remember the headline. When I hit publish, what we have now in the announcement is not a still image, not even a movie, but the interactive object itself. So when I press play, that interactive object is now in the course itself, right? So think about some potential applications for that. Certainly in history, when we're talking about examining historical artifacts in some detail, this is great. But think about, for example, something simple in science like the model of a cell. So you can give them a diagram, you give them a flat image, but what if you use a 3D model of a cell that's actually interactive, that they can move and spin around? In geography, instead of showing a picture of landmass, what if it's a model of that landmass that they can interact with from all sorts of different angles, right? So this sort of approach is really easy and really straightforward. So what I'm going to try and do now is I'm going to take a bit of a risk because I totally forgot to download the model in advance. So I'm going to download this model and hope it works. Oh, first of all, I have to sign in. Just give me a second. You're all going to know I'm on Facebook now. How embarrassing is that? Don't look me up. It's not that exciting. All right, so I think I'm in there. I'm going to try downloading that one more time. Okay. So what we can do is we can actually take that model we downloaded and hopefully insert it in Word. So let me just get the Word document ready for you. And I realize you probably can't see Word either. Is that correct?
No Word right now.
No Word. All right. Now Word?
Yeah.
Rock and roll. Okay. So bear with me for just a couple seconds as I get that download ready. And what you can't see that I'm doing in the background, because again, I forgot to do it, is I'm just going through the process of extracting the folder that was in there. And I'm going to extract it again. Okay, let's see if this is going to work. So in Word, when you go to insert, you have all these options that you used before. You probably put pictures in here. You probably put shapes and icons. But you may not have noticed this option, which is 3D models. Now, when you click here, you do have the option of going through stock 3D models, which is kind of cool. So for example, you can choose tools and emojis and the dinosaurs are pretty cool. But if you go to your own, so I'm going to go to my own device, and I'm going to go to downloads, and I'm going to go statue. I'm going to go to the source. And what we should see, hopefully, as we wait patiently, is that the 3D model of Hatshepsut, the same one we were looking at, is going to be embedded in this Word document. And so what's super cool about that is, if it works, is that that 3D figure will be, we'll be able to move that figure around, be able to interact with it. And so will our students, right? So can you see the object right now?
Yeah.
Great. So take a look at this. I am now dragging that object around, manipulating if we wish to, right? So I want you to think about this. Imagine that you take your standard worksheet, bunch of questions on the side, asking students to make some observations about this. If we give it to them as a flat image that we print off on a piece of paper, that's good. I mean, they could still make some observations. But what if this was given to them digitally and they download it, and the thing they're examining in some detail is actually interactive? They can move that thing around. They can still answer all those questions on the side. They can still investigate this object and complete their work. But the thing they're actually examining is now an interactive piece. I think that's pretty cool. And again, I want you to think about what might that look like in your subject area and your grade. What model could you provide that would stimulate the kind of thinking that you're looking for? Okay, so let me switch back to PowerPoint for just a second. Another really powerful tool option is using apps, right? And I'm sure you have some experience with AR, augmented reality. I think it's now being called XR to kind of cover all the different bases. If you played Pokemon Go, then you know what I'm talking about. There's two I'd like you to try and take a look at really quickly. There's Sketchfab, which is the same app we were just looking at moments ago, and Civilizations AR. What these apps allow us to do is they allow us to take the models that we see from these websites and through the app and place them in our physical space. And so the Civilizations AR app was a bit of an eye-opener for me, because the first time I used it, I was able to put an Egyptian sarcophagus on my kitchen table, which is pretty remarkable, right? So as you're experimenting with that, I'm going to show you a video I shot, I think it was yesterday, in my classroom with my student teacher. You're going to notice I didn't exactly control my camera angles very well, but I'll show you what it looks like in Sketchfab to try and download an object. So I chose this. This is Petra in Jordan. You might recognize it from Indiana Jones film. It is carved out of solid rock. It's just wonderful. So I open it up in the app, and then the app asks me to find flat ground. See those little dots there? It's the camera's reading that space, and this is where the bad camera work comes in, where I tilted the camera the wrong way. But watch what happens here. I swear it's going to happen. Just wait. There we go. Okay, so what we have is Petra on the desk, right? And what's amazing is, I'm going to try and zoom here. That's pretty remarkable quality. So here's why I think this is incredibly powerful, is that if you look at this, the ability this gives students to look at the object is wonderful. But the thing is, the way you get the object to move around is you get up and move around, right? So the camera treats the object like it's stationary in the middle of that desk. And so if I want to see the other side of this, I have to move around back. If I want to zoom in, I have to move closer to that object physically. And what a great way to just get students off their feet, right? And to use that space. And so imagine if you're even in the gym where there's lots of space. I know we have to worry about social distancing now and physical distancing, but imagine if students could walk around that object and view it from different angles. I did a really interesting experiment with a CHC 2P class, which is Applied Canadian History, just before the pandemic hit, where I took a fairly traditional handout with questions that I wanted students to answer. But what I did is I gave them QR codes that link to the Sketchfab app and to these specific models. And so the students had to place those models on that space and interact with that models to answer those questions. So a really simple example would be, I sent them to a model of a World War I trench, and I just asked a simple question: well, how do you know which side is no man's land, right? Which seems like a really simple question, but they had to examine the model and see, well, there's barbed wire on this side, we see sandbags here. But it's because they had to go and look and zoom in that really changed that perspective, right? So again, I want you to think about how your students would respond if they could see this object on their desk and interact with it in that way. It's I think, a very, very powerful way of giving them access to that kind of technology. So we're going to take a bit of a break from talking about the models for a moment. And we're going to talk a little bit about 360 cameras instead. Okay, so I'm going to guess you have some experience maybe with, or at least an understanding of what a 360 camera is. You think GoPro and that sort of thing. You may have even watched 360 videos online. You may have even experimented with one of these. This is an incredibly cheap 3D setup that actually just relies on your camera. Your camera goes right in here. We use them in class fairly regularly. We've got a class set, $14 each. Quite amazing. Here's what I want you to do. I tried embedding this video, but because the video is 360, it just didn't work. It would really lag. So I want you to try going to YouTube. I'd like you to try looking for a video, We Had to Leave, a refugee story from Greece. I'm going to actually, maybe I'll just copy and paste the link itself over for you in the chat so you can see where that is. And so what I'd like you to do is watch that video. It's not very long, but what I want you to do is I want you to remember that that video is 360. And so what that means is, even if you don't have one of these fancy goggles, you can drag over the video and move around. And I want you to pay really close attention to how it feels to be in that tent at the end when they're talking, also how it feels to be on that boat. So I'm gonna give you about 3 minutes or so. Just watch that video. I'll do the same here so we're all on the same timeline. Remember to move your camera around. Okay. One other moment back. And we good? All right. So if you watch that video, I'm going to guess you were struck by a couple things. Even on a flat screen, it feels a little bit like you're in that tent, doesn't it? Especially if you look around, the kids, the people behind you. Imagine what it feels like in one of these. Again, remember, these are $14. You put your phone in them, and it feels like you're in that spot. And I chose that video for a few reasons, because the main reason being, it reminded me of the first time I ever put on a set of VR goggles. The first time I ever did was someone asked me to watch this video shot by the United Nations of the Secretary General of the UN visiting a refugee camp. And the 360 camera was following him, and it was held at exactly a human's height. And numerous times the refugees looked over and looked at the camera. It felt like they were looking at me. It felt like I was there, right? And I think there's something really powerful about the 360 camera in the sense that it situates you wherever that camera was, right? And that's really where the power comes from. So if I go back to sharing my screen for a minute, I want you to check out this website that is by the UN. It's called myworld360.org. And there are contests every year, by the way, for this, and you can enter your students into this, where the UN essentially collects narratives, 360 narratives made by students from around the world telling their stories, right? The first one I ever watched was this great one from somewhere in the States, I can't remember where students really want to capture what it is like to feel isolated and bullied. And so they put the camera down in this desk and made it feel like you were the student sitting at this desk. And you would look around, you'd see all these groups of students talking on the sides. And then they superimposed a second layer of video on top of that, of someone kind of walking in. It felt like they were a ghost until they became solid, and they would whisper things in your ear about you. You're not good enough, you're stupid, all this stuff. It's almost like an inner monologue, an inner monologue about what's going on in someone's head as they feel these things. And the last scene of the video is someone walking in to the scene without that ghosting effect. So we kind of know they're real. And they walks in, and this kid just invites you to join the group. Just really, really simple structure, but it's amazing how that video makes you feel like that person who's experiencing this, right? And this website is full of all these different kinds of stories. And so one thing I want you to think about is, because these cameras are becoming increasingly more affordable, it's amazing how we could actually use these to tell stories too. So my board wanted to make a video to prepare students for COVID that were happening in the classrooms. So we actually used my 360 camera to record from the student's perspective. What would they see? They walk in, the principal greets them, shows them where the hand sanitizer is and which way they need to walk to get to their class. And then they get to the class, and the teacher addresses them and explains how the class is going to function. And because it's first person, it feels like those people are talking to you. And I think that's a really powerful thing. Before we move on to the next section, I'll tell you one more story. It's about a student I taught last year and the year before who's gone through numerous concussions. And she was really frustrated by how difficult it was for her to not only adjust to school, but also articulate like to be back in school when you're still dealing with concussions. So what she started to do before the pandemic hit was work on this video that would actually show the viewer what it's like to have concussion symptoms in a school. So we were going to film her walking through the school, and when she looked at a computer monitor, in post-production, we were going to jack up the light so bright that the average person would have to look away, right? Or we were going to intensify the sound so much that it would really be jarring, because these are the things she has to endure. And so she was hoping that this would help her communicate her understanding, her feelings to everyone else who maybe just can sympathize but can't really empathize, if that makes sense, right? And so before we move on, I just want you to think about what kind of stories could your students tell about their world, right? And I think that is, that's the sort of thing that could work at any level. I could certainly see it working at a high school level, but I can imagine that working really well in primary and junior, for example. So let's talk about how you actually make this stuff. As I mentioned before, it's a time commitment, but once you understand the basics of how you can actually do this, it's fairly straightforward. Doesn't mean your results will always be good, but the process is fairly straightforward. And what's amazing, it can be incredibly cheap. Now it can be students' phones to take the picture. So the process I'm going to tell you about now is called photogrammetry. It's a fancy word that essentially means taking a bunch of pictures, hence the photo part, and turning those photos into a 3D model. And the process is essentially the same, no matter what you are attempting to do. So the first thing you have to do is you have to take a bunch of photos. So I took a bunch of photos of this seahorse statue in Monterey, California. And you import the photos into the program, which is reasonably straightforward. And then you ask the computer to align them. Now, again, if you see here along the side, I'm just following the set of menus. I'm not really deviating from these steps. It says align photos. I click on align photos and it aligns them. And so you can see here, those squares, those bluish squares are all outlines of the photos. So what the computer essentially does, or the program does, it takes all those photos, looks for commonalities, similar points of light, and kind of works out, triangulates in 3D space where those objects must be. So all these dots that you see way out here on the outside are points in the shots that are outside that statue, like they're down the road, they're a car that was passing by, all that stuff, right? And what we have here in the middle of all these pictures is the statue I am trying to replicate in 3D. You've aligned those photos is to build a dense point cloud, which again, I'm not even sure what that really means, other than it builds a cloud of dense points. And you can see it looks a lot like a statue, right? It's starting to look like it should. This process takes a long time, so this is a great point to get some coffee or to walk away for a little bit. In fact, it's amazing how once you get good at taking the pictures, it's amazing how much of this is click, walk away, click, walk away. Oh, we're done. So once we've hit that option, the next step is to build the mesh. And a mesh is essentially a 3D object. So if you think of any video game that you may have seen or played, any object you see in that world, whether it's a player, a building, whatever, is made up of two components, right? There's the texture, which is the outside, the painted thing, and that is wrapped around a mesh, right? And a mesh is just a series of polygons that are connected. And so you can see here that the statue is starting to look a heck of a lot like a statue, right? And the last step is building that texture. And you can see that's a pretty accurate rendering, right? A few things I want to point out to you here is are that I was using my iPhone, and it's an old iPhone. It's nothing special. So if you use a really good quality camera, you will get even much better results. You'll notice here that the inside of the statue, if you look kind of in between the seahorses, you can see the model doesn't look quite right. It's joined at places, and it looks like there's extra space there. Well, if the program can't see into a space, then it can't really create a model. So that's why we're getting that. So if you were to see the bottom of this this vessel that the seahorses are sitting in, you'll see that it's empty. There are holes in it because I couldn't get the bottom of that shape, right? Similarly, programs like this don't do a really good job of capturing anything that's transparent or translucent. And it doesn't work well with shiny objects because the shiny objects reflect the light too much, and the program can't identify where things are in 3D space because of those reflections, right? So,
question, Jim,
sure.
What is this app called?
There are a couple. I think I've actually got them on a slide that's coming up in a few moments. The one I'm using right now, this is Aegisoft Photo Scan. It's your best bet for middle of the road stuff. The educational version, I think, is $60. it's one that it's the best of both worlds. It costs a little bit of money, but it gets you really good models. There's one I'll show you in a few minutes or link to that's called Meshroom. It's actually made, it's a joint project by a bunch of universities, and it automates most of the process, and it's free. It's just you don't have a lot of control over how things look. It's actually a really good place to start, though. I'll show you that in a moment or two, if that's okay. The one thing maybe we could think about right now, so imagine that you learn how to do this, or even better yet, your students learn how to do this. I want you to think about how this technology might be used in any area, but especially these ones: game design and film, archaeology and museum curation, biology and medicine, engineering, online shopping, or any other ones. So if you have any ideas, I'm cool with you turning on the mic, certainly, but if you want to post in the chat, that's good too. Anna, I don't see the chat at the moment, so let me just bring that up. Yep, and I see the question from Colin about the importing those objects into Word. I will get that. Maybe, Anna, if anything is posted in the chat, can you just let me know?
Yep.
Sure. So as we're waiting for that, I'll just give you some potential connections. So certainly game design and film, bit of a no-brainer, right? I think certainly in games, increasingly companies are using this approach to create 3D worlds, right? They can create accurate models of various places. We can also in film get really high quality renderings of cities that can be used in CGI. That's great. I mean, we already know it's used in archaeology and museum curation. I've already showed you some examples of that. Every major museum now is engaged in this. And so if you're a history teacher and you start having your students doing this, this is one heck of a career connection, right? I mean, the curriculum asks us to make connections to potential career options. And if students have even know what this is, but if they even have some familiarity with the process, think about that advantage that gives them if they decide to go into this field. Biology and medicine, the ability to replicate organs, parts of the anatomy, to represent objects in this way. Imagine this in science class, right? If you have high quality 3D renderings of different parts, anatomical parts, the advantages that gives students in terms of their ability to interact is really powerful. In terms of engineering, I know and I've seen it actually, where companies have used drones to take the pictures and then take pictures of an entire city block, turn it into a model, and then use that as a basis for their redesign, because now they have a highly accurate rendition of where everything actually is, right? So it's an incredible starting point. And certainly online shopping, there's a really good chance that any object you can spin around started as a 3D model itself, or it may actually be something that was made, a model that was made via photogrammetry, and shoes are, for example, a really good example of that.
Question, can you
Sure.
embed these models, or does it stay on the app?
That's a great question. Wait till you see where we're going next. You have several options. So you could embed these models. So you could, so for example, you could embed them in Word like we looked at before. You can create accounts with Sketchfab and upload models there. Now, the only thing, a free account at Sketchfab limits you, I think, to 1 model a month upload. Microsoft used to have a free service, but unfortunately they've taken that down. But there are a few other things you can do with the models that I'd like to show you as well. Let me just see here. Oh, by the way, my apologies. You mentioned the apps before. Here are some of the apps you can use. Zephyr 3D is actually a great place to start. Just remember to use the free version. So if you go to 3dflow.net, the free version limits you to, I think, 49 images that you can input, which is an okay starting place. So it'll give you an idea of how things work. The full version, I think, is $5,000. If you have $5,000 kicking around, buy me a copy too, because I would like one. Meshroom is that one I mentioned that is a collaborative project by a bunch of universities. So it's free, and it does automate the whole process. You can see all the steps going along the bottom, but you literally input the photos and you walk away, and a couple hours later you get something. It's an interesting experiment. I think the difficulty there is because it's really hard to manipulate all the settings along the way. It's not very intuitive, but it is a good place to start just to see what happens. And then Aegisoft Metashape Photo Scan, that's the one I'm using. It's a nice middle of the road option. There are programs that cost thousands of dollars, much more even than Zephyr 3D. We talked to an historian once who described one that is, I think, made in Eastern Europe that is, she said something like, we're not sure what black magic is in there, but it's the best thing we've ever seen, but it costs like $10,000. So what other things can you do with this? So you can scan people. So human skin actually scans very well. So this is actually my colleague, Rob Doria. He's a great guy. He actually runs a game room at our school where every lunch there's a Smash Brothers happening, or chess, or Pokemon, whatever the case is. And so because there are tournaments all year, we wanted to create a statue, a prize for the winning student. So we scanned Rob, we turned him into a 3D model, we printed them off, we put them on a little platform and a little plaque, and we awarded that to the student. Now, that's nice, but there's some other things you can do that with this too. If you combine photogrammetry and 3D printing, you can do some really interesting things as well. So this is a box full of models of ancient Rome, most of which we just printed off from the internet. So we downloaded models from Sketchfab and other places, and websites that were more aimed at 3D printing, printed off the models. And what we made, or what we're continue to make, is a huge interactive map of Rome. So this map, I know it's hard to tell from where it is on the ground, but it's about 10 feet by 12 feet. And we have a series of buildings that go on the map. And what we did is each student in my class was responsible for researching that building at a really high level, creating an audio document that we uploaded, or an audio file that we uploaded to SoundCloud. And then we took a QR code, pasted on the bottom of that model that led directly to that student's audio recording. So what we have is essentially a museum in a box, right? We can give it to another school, they can throw the map down, they can put all the buildings out, and they could use their phones, pick up the model of the building, scan it, listen to the student describe it as they're actually looking at that model, right? I think that's pretty remarkable, right? And so this is a project we hope to grow over time. As you can imagine, like many projects, it's on hold right now due to some very specific guidelines we need to follow. But think about how 3D printing of these models could be used in your own classroom, right? Think of the opportunity to create manipulatives that you never thought you could have before, right? Especially something in like science. So if you go to Sketchfab, viruses, you could print those off and now have those manipulatives in your classroom. I think that's pretty amazing. We did decide to take this to a different level. However, I love video games in a way that perhaps no adult should. And I really want to experiment with game design. And so what we've been experimenting with is using a video game engine called Unity to create an interactive museum that you can actually download for free from my website. And it's called the Scanning History Project. I'll show you a clip in a second. I've been working with students at our own school to scan artifacts, and it's super cool. We go to local museums, and the museums are thrilled to have us there. And what's amazing is how gracious the curators are about actually letting students interact with the objects. They teach them how to put on the white gloves, they teach them how to hold the objects properly. And they're learning a lot about museum care in the process, right? And so we scan the artifacts and we add them to this museum. I've been also working with Indigenous communities, so Standing Stone of the Oneida Nation, and with our own board's Indigenous organization called the Grand Confederacy Council, to scan artifacts that are significant to local Indigenous cultures. We went to a museum in Scanado, which is just down the road, and there's an 8,000-year-old mastodon jaw behind glass. And so the students from the Grand Confederate class was getting in the way. The curator there ripped apart the whole case willingly and excitedly to let the students get access to this model, right? And so in the video you're about to see, you should see that model and hopefully a few others as well. So let me just press play. By the way, the music here is Creative Commons. It's actually played by one of our graduates. And so this is a rendition of the museum. In the background, you can see behind our school banner, you can actually see that's our cenotaph, World War I, World War II cenotaph in the center of Strathroy. Different objects that we've scanned. And so what we have here is a museum that people can download, anyone can download and interact with and explore. And what I hope to have is to work with different cultures from around the world and have students add to this museum and just add more rooms as we go. And there's a mastodon jaw. I think that's kind of awesome. Okay. I think there's just a little bit more. Yeah. And that's an early design of our museum. I think it has a lot of possibilities. Figure out how to go to the next slide properly in. There we go. So that's what I was looking for, the next one. So once I had done that, I decided to experiment a little bit more with what we could do in this space. So remember that 2-week period where school wasn't happening in March? We just didn't know what was going to happen. I decided to see if I could build a quick museum. So I took existing models, all from Sketchfab. I actually contacted the archaeologist who uploaded them, and he said, "Of course you can use these." And again, they're all listed as Creative Commons anyway, but I just wanted to double check. And so I've actually created a 3D museum based on Egypt that you can download for free from my website as well. This is an early version of it. It gives you an idea of how it actually functions. And so in each case, as you move close to the object, you get a description of the object, you get an inquiry question essentially that can guide learning. And it provides students a new way, a different way of interacting with 3D objects at a time where they can't go to museums, right? They can't have these kinds of experiences. And again, especially considering that many of these objects are ones they will not be able to see in person anyway, due to distance. I think it's a particularly effective way of sharing work. Now, by the way, something to consider is the museum approach doesn't have to be limited to artifacts scanned by historians, right? So say I was talking with a colleague who's an art teacher and saying, how cool would it be to have student work from our school in a museum like this that people could download and they can walk through and see our students' work, whether it's 2-dimensional that we can just take with a photo and put on a wall, like a painting or a photo, or actually a 3D scan using the same technology and approaches that I showed you a little bit earlier. So.
Question again, Jim. What is the software called for making the museum?
Okay, so I will, there's a reason I saved that for last because that is a bit of a learning curve, without question. It actually is called Unity, and it's a game design engine, and there are tons of tutorials online that will help you. There's a lot of learning to be done for that to happen though. So if you are interested in that sort of approach down the road, I think you want to start with the other applications first, wrapping your head around how to use 3D technology and existing 3D models, and then kind of work your way up to the game design element. Because I mean, it's a lot of fun. You can do some great stuff, but it is a bit of a time sink too. The good news is it is free. So if you choose Unity, and I think gamers will be able to, Unreal has a free version as well. It allows you to produce full games, and it is fun learning. Now, the other consideration though is this, especially if you teach intermediate or senior, so grade 7s up, the odds of you having a student who's already experimented with game design is actually pretty high. Like it's something that students do in their spare time more frequently than we might think. At the very least, I would be absolutely shocked if you're in a high school and there weren't a handful of kids who hadn't experienced or hadn't experimented with game design on their own. So maybe instead of you learning how to use Unity, you try and find out in the school which students are experimenting with game design in some way. So I'm going to stop screen sharing if that's okay. So we go back to this view. So questions, comments, feel free. Software. And I think Colin asked a question before, Anna, about what software I use to embed the model in Word. It's actually not any kind of specific software. All you have to do is download the model. And then when you download the model from Sketchfab, and I should mention too, Colin, not every model is downloadable. It kind of depends on what the author decides to do. But it downloads as a zip file, and the zip file is just a compressed file folder. And so you extract it, and then you have to go in a folder and extract it again. But essentially, you're not using any outside software. You're just using a pre-built feature in Word. And by the way, you can even start by just looking at those preset models in Word. A lot of them would be much better suited to, I think, elementary than secondary. But there's some great stuff in there. And if I remember correctly, I think the T-Rex is animated, which, come on, that's awesome.
I just had an idea. So
Sure.
when you were showing museum, I was wondering, like, I just had this idea for what if you made a whole virtual classroom like that,
Totally.
where students could like go, go to the play corner, go to the math corner, go, I don't know, go to the one-on-one with teachers, like, and request to talk to their teacher or something like that. Like, I feel like there's so many things that you could do, but it would be really complicated.
So complicated. You're right. Now, what's interesting about that is, while that doesn't exist, I don't think yet. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. The technology exists. So if you've ever seen stuff like AltSpace or anything like that, where what's the one that it's not as popular anymore? But there are platforms that are essentially social media platforms, but in a 3D space where you interact with people and you can experience little events. I just don't think there's one aimed at a classroom specifically, but that would be super cool, especially if the need for virtual classrooms continue, right? I mean, that ability to interact that way would be great, because I think one thing we're all struggling with is a lot of synchronous learning right now at home can feel a little bit passive, right? I mean, going back to flat screens, it does feel like you're watching TV, and there's a distance there, right? So your idea is great. I'm just not the person to carry that one out.
No one steal it. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, okay.
Someone knows how to do that.
Yeah.
Email me. I'm just kidding. Any other questions for Jim? Q&A button or in the chat, whatever you want.
Oh, okay. So I see the question about the so the 3D printer thing. So, yeah, so there are lots of ways you can 3D print. One of them is the technique we use. So if you create a model using photogrammetry, you can essentially print that model, right? Now the print will lose the texture, all the color and all that stuff. And so it'll come out whatever color the plastic is that you're using in the printer, it'll come out that way. But yeah, you can do that. The other possibility there is, if you're more interested in the printing side, is websites like Thingiverse and I'm blanking on the other ones that have models that other people have uploaded. So I'll give you a good example of a model that someone uploaded that's super cool. So a teacher somewhere in Ontario was trying to figure out how to show while on Zoom or Teams or what have you, how to show what he was doing on his keyboard. So he invented a little clip that just sits up here, and he literally just glued a 2x2 piece of mirror, and it perfectly reflects his hands. So that may seem like reasonably, well, it may seem unimportant, but it actually is really powerful. So imagine you're an art teacher and you're trying to teach virtually. You could actually use this to show your students the technique that you need them to do with the brush, right? So there are lots of different applications for that. Even something as simple as, I know one teacher who now uses that and covers her keyboard with a plank of wood, and then just show equations on paper because she's much more comfortable with that. That's how she does it. So the students are still seeing that. So there are tons of models like that you can print off, different objects you can use. That's a great way to get started in this as well. And 3D printers, even though they can seem intimidating at first, they're pretty straightforward. I think of them as glorified glue guns. Like you think, you know, what a glue gun does is you put the glue at the end, there's a little thing that heats up the glue and then it drops little droplets along, right? That's essentially what a 3D printer is doing with plastic, except you've told it to drop these little bits of plastic in very precise locations from that model. So yeah, there's tons of stuff you can do with that. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions? No. Well, I'll ask you the same question I asked you last time to finish it off. If I was going into my first day of teaching tomorrow, what would you tell me?
And I can't use the same answer I did last time, huh?
Yeah, you gotta change it up.
Change it up. Okay. Talk to the students. How about that? So I showed a 3D model of my colleague Rob Doria. I'll use him as an example. I remember watching Rob teach, like this was years ago, at the beginning of class, and he was really moving around the class slowly, handing out pieces of paper. And I remember talking to him like, why do you do that? I mean, that's pretty inefficient, right? I mean, and what he does, he actually uses that time to talk to each kid. So instead of handing out a handout to this kid and having to move it back, he just goes around the classroom, gives it to each individual kid, talks to each kid for a minute. And then by the time he's done, he's checked in with every single kid, and every student still has what they need to move on, right? So something as simple as that, where you've actually made a human connection and connected to that student in some way, I don't think that can be, the power of that is something special.
Awesome. Well, thank you attendees for participating and coming, and thank you, Jim, for doing round 2 for you. That's awesome. We just have you on every night teaching something.
And by the way, if you ever want to contact me about the questions you might have, I'll throw my Twitter in there just in case. There you go, and you can reach me that way. Again, if there's something the resources in your classroom, start with that using a projector, right? And then build from there and see what happens.
Yeah, awesome. And then attendees, just go back and check out the other events that are coming up in the coming weeks. We have a few more. I think for the next 3 weeks, there's about 2 per week. So go check out what's going on for those, see if you're interested, and then you can come RSVP to those too. And you can see me again. Not Jim, though, unfortunately, but you can see me.
They've had enough of me. That's good.
Probably have enough of me soon. But yeah, thanks, Jim. Thank you, attendees.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Have a good night.